In the election manifestos published by the opposition parties ahead of the June 7 elections, the parties vow to give momentum to Turkey's bid to accede to the European Union, a process that has stalled due to the Justice and Development Party's AK Party policies, which have been viewed by the EU as not being in line with the country's commitments to enter the EU. Speaking to today's Zaman on Monday, main opposition Republican People's Party, CHP, Adana deputy and former Turkish ambassador to the US, Faruk Loğoğlu, commented on the party's vision for Turkey's accession to the EU in the next parliamentary term by saying that the CHP considers Turkey's entry into the EU as a strategic goal. Noting that Turkey's EU accession process is viewed by the CHP as a continuation of the modernization of the country since its foundation in 1923, Loğoğlu said that during the next parliamentary term the CHP will pursue policies with regard to Turkey's efforts to enter the EU. Accession to the EU will serve the interests of Turkey in terms of economic and political aspects. Turkey's entry to the EU will also contribute to the improvement of relations between the Muslim and Christian world, said Loğoğlu. People's Democratic Party, HDP, Deputy Chairman, Najmi Gür, told today's Zaman on Monday that during the next term in Parliament, the HDP will prop up policies that contribute to Turkey's accession to the EU. The HDP has been one of the parties that supported Turkey's EU accession process. When EU standards, such as basic human rights, the rule of law and an independent judiciary, are taken into account, we think that this process is indispensable for Turkey. In this regard, we will lend support to Turkey's bid to accede to the EU during the next term in Parliament, said Gür. He also criticized the AK party by saying that due to the party's mistakes in foreign policy, Turkey's EU process has come to a halt. We think that during the AK party's rule, Turkey lost its perspective on the EU due to the different choices made by the party in foreign policy, said Gür. The Nationalist Movement Party, MHP, underlines in its election manifesto that Turkey should not make compromises on several issues such as Cyprus or the normalization of relations with Armenia. The MHP maintains that Turkey's EU bid is not an indispensable policy goal and that the EU needs to recognize Turkey's national sensitivities. The EU calls on Turkey to overcome the dispute in Cyprus by ending the more than 40 years of division on the island. The EU also calls on Turkey to normalize relations with Armenia, which were broken off after the invasion of the Azerbaijani territory of Nagorno-Karabakh in 1991. Turkey and the EU began accession talks on 35 negotiating chapters in 2005, but there has been very little progress since then amid opposition to Turkish membership in some EU countries, including France, and the unresolved Cyprus dispute. The EU has opened 14 chapters with Turkey so far, but 17 chapters remain blocked. At the same time, Turkey has been under fire from EU institutions that have heavily criticized Turkey over the regression of democracy in the country. In a discussion at the European Parliament regarding the progress report on Turkey, the dismal state of democracy in Turkey and the erosion of judicial independence and media freedom in the country, was highlighted. Drafted by Dutch Social Democrat Kati Piri, the report on Turkey was overwhelmingly accepted by the Foreign Affairs Committee, AFET, of the Parliament last week, ahead of a general vote in the near future. The report criticized the Justice and Development Party, AK Party, for backtracking on fundamental rights and reforms essential to Turkey's EU bid and highlighted a wide range of issues. The arrest of judges and prosecutors, the lengthy pre-trial detention of journalist Hidayet Karaka and charges against Zaman Daily Editor-in-Chief Ekrem Dumanel were all mentioned in the report, which called for a fair and objective trial process while also expressing deep concern about the accusations being leveled against members of the press. The report stresses that worsening individual liberties and rights, and the erosion of the rule of law given the government's continued interventions in judicial affairs, are of major concern to the EU as it offers details of gross violations of the country's constitutional laws. The report also slams the AK party for failing to combat corruption, and worsening press freedom and judicial independence, while it praised the efforts to bring a political solution to the decades-old Kurdish problem through engaging in dialogue on the conflict. Turkey has suffered significant setbacks regarding democracy, a process that began with the Gezi Park protests of 2013 and was further affected by a corruption scandal later that year that caused a political storm in the country, the report argued. The government's restructuring of the Supreme Board of Judges and Prosecutors, HSYK, the top legal administrative body that regulates judicial affairs including appointing judges and prosecutors, constitutes another major concern for the EU as the report regards interference with the HSYK as a means of subjugating the independent judiciary. The report also urged the EU to back Turkey's efforts to build solid, democratic institutions and ensure respect for fundamental freedoms, human rights, and the rule of law. Finally, it advocated stepping up EU-Turkey foreign policy cooperation. The Turkish government must commit itself unequivocally to respecting democratic rules and principles, which are at the heart of the EU, the members said, inviting the country to put the reform process at the center of domestic policy choices. A new constitution, based on provisions promoting a pluralistic, inclusive, and tolerant society, would underpin such a process, it added. The members also called on the Turkish government to conclude in a sustainable way the peace process with the Kurdish community. Furthermore, the report said they regret the Turkish decision to build the İl-Su Dam, in a region mostly inhabited by Kurds, which is expected to have devastating social, environmental, and political effects on the local population.